at beginninggenealogist.com. Hope you're having a good day today. I have a question for you. How well do you know your records? Now, what I mean by that is that have you thought of the different types of records that you look at when you're conducting your genealogy research? There are 4 types of records that I would encourage you to make a general checklist, so when you pull out information on any one of your ancestors, you can go right down the list and make sure you utilized all of these record types or these record sources for your ancestor. And if you haven't, you know where those gaps are and you can go back and continue to get more information. I'm referring to federal, state, local, and personal or family papers. Federal records. What are those records? Well, of course, everybody uses the census records, and most people know that census records are federal records, and records by their type or their source is a record that's going to be found in a certain type of resource. For example, federal records are going to be housed in federal repositories, government repositories. Census records, they're conducted by the government and they're housed by the government. Yes, they're digitized, they're just a click away. But it's important to understand where the sources are when you want to go and look at perhaps some types of documents that are part of the census that haven't quite been digitized that you still want to be able to look at, such as non-population census records. But there's so much more. What else is a federal record? Social Security records. Many of us use the Social Security Death Index all the time. Now, if you decide that you want to apply and obtain the original Social Security application, understand that you're not going to go to the National Archives, but you are going to write to the Social Security Administration. That is a federal agency. So understand, Social Security is also a federal record. There are military records that you may be interested in obtaining, whether this is enlistment data, World War I, draft cards, Civil War pension files, or Spanish American, or as far back as the American Revolution. Those records are military. They are housed at the National Archives, so you know where you're going to have to go to be able to look at those pension images as well. And of course, there are some unique records that one would find that are also federal, and you don't necessarily think of them coming to mind right away. I'm referring to the Southern Claims Commission. I'm referring to the Freedmen's Bureau, or Record Group 105. One reason that the Freedmen's Bureau is housed or is considered certainly a federal resource, because Record Group 105 is a military resource. It's a military record group or record set. So because of that, it too is part of the federal records. The Freedmen's Savings Bank. If you want to look at some of the original Freedmen's Savings passbooks, you would go to the Federal Record Center or the National Archives in College Park, Maryland to see that. So again, understand where the actual items that you're looking at, even though you're looking at a digitized image, understand where it comes from. Now, on the state level, wonderful things can be found on the state level as well. You've heard me talk about vital records. You've heard me refer to, of course, the birth, marriage, death records that we all utilize. Well, those records, of course, are sort of standard. Most people know that they're on the state level. But do you know that some states have voter registration records that can be utilized? Find out if your ancestors were eligible to vote and where those records are kept. Many state repositories or halls of records or archives are making those records available as well. There are sometimes state census records that were conducted. Not every state conducted them, and not every state that conducted them at the same time. So you must become familiar with what is unique about the states that you research. I research multiple states, so I have to be aware of resources that are available in all of those states, because it is certainly something that is important. Cohabitation records can be found in certain states, but certainly not in all. Again, you want to find out where those can be found. And in some cases, I've seen bounty records that are available on a state level. Again, you must become familiar with what your Hall of Records or your state archives makes available for public inspection. I know, for example, in the state of Mississippi, there's a record set pertaining to educable children, and this is wonderful information. It wasn't conducted every year, but some of those records are wonderful. I have found a few ancestors that were there in one of my counties. They also vary in terms of condition. Some were damaged very badly by water. Some look as if they had been eaten away, perhaps by something else. And then other images were fairly clear. So it is important to at least know what does exist. The local level, you have schools, you have churches, you have cemeteries, and you also have, which is perhaps maybe more fascinating, at least for me sometimes to play with, are the city directories. Churches can vary. If you're part of a church that is affiliated with a large denomination, you may be more able to obtain information through the denomination headquarters, but in some cases you may find it's the local area churches that may have the data, especially if the early membership rosters are available. Cemeteries can certainly vary, and in some cases there's a sexton who kept meticulous records. In some cases there are no records that exist, and it was perhaps at one time they did exist and have either been lost or misplaced. You may want to think about it. I suggest if you're going to a community and you find that the cemetery does not have any papers that are searchable, and if that cemetery is fairly accessible, you may want to make a contribution to the genealogy community and document that cemetery. That might be the beginning of some source of data for other researchers as well. But my favorite, of course, can be city directories. City directories are wonderful because you get information not just on who lived there, but the different types of entities, whether they were business, where the government structure was, and sometimes what the social groups were. I found in my hometown in Fort Smith, Arkansas, I found that in 1911 there was a Paul Laurence Dunbar literary club. And this was something that was just so intriguing to me. He's one of my favorite poets, but to know that here was a literary club named after a famous black poet told me that this was something that the African American community was part of. And again, had I not looked at that city directory, I never would have known that. But anyway, my recommendation as you begin to look at these resources is to make sure that you found, or you've at least sought for information, even if you didn't find it, on your ancestors and all of these record sources. Now, I also mentioned personal or family, and I must say something about that. You know, when you get started, you're going to start to look at the old photos, you're going to pull out old papers, and sometimes papers that you think should be discarded can hold a wealth of data for you. I'm referring to old letters, old insurance papers, old receipts. If you're finding a receipt that's been kept in the family for 50, 60, 70 years, there's a reason for that. Take a look at that and see what kind of data can be extracted. And of course, we know the value of old photographs and trying to get as many people identified as you can. Can't be stated nearly enough. But of course, there are also those wonderful old Bibles, and to pay attention. I'll say something about Bible records too. Pay attention to the penmanship. Was it written by one person? Was it the same hand that tended to write every entry in the family Bible? Then that's telling you that sometimes that information was written long after these events occurred. If the penmanship is somewhat different, that's likely to be a situation in which those Bible entries were made when the events that are being described took place. And of course, pay attention to the years of which the individuals were born or died or were married, and then look at the publication date of that Bible and see if there's something else you can glean from that information as well. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.